That's what I thought. Garrett might be planning something. Blockers galore for Garrett. Blocks ace king. Blocks pocket tens. Has a hand that he doesn't want to call with. Garrett Adelstein, the GOAT. Doing it again, putting Andy's stacks in the blender.
Hello and welcome to the second episode of Live Poker Theory, where I'm doing solver walkthroughs of live stream poker hands. Here we have a classic rivalry between Garrett Adelstein, aka G-Man Poker, and Andy Stacks. Garrett makes a huge river raise bluff to blow Andy off the best hand. These guys have played a ton together on a variety of live streams. They have a ton of history together. I think that played a role in this bluff. Let's quickly review pre-flop. Garrett raises King 10 suited from the cutoff. Andy 3-bets the King Jack suited from the small blind, and Garrett calls. All three of these actions are very standards with these hands, and we can use pretty standard small blind versus cutoff ranges, where Andy has more of the strong hands like the pocket aces. Garrett's a little more capped with more of those suited broadways and pairs, and a suited aces as well. And these ranges might be a little tight because these live stream guys do play pretty wide because they get uninvited to the stream if they play too tight. But I just want to keep it simple for this video. So we see a flop of ace-a-7 with two hearts. The commentary suggests this is a good board for Andy, who has more ace-king, having 3-bet pre-flop. We'd expect Garrett to 4-bet that, so Garrett doesn't have much ace-king. But Garrett, we still expect to flat plenty of suited aces. So he actually has plenty of trip aces as well here. And with his positional advantage, they actually realize equity and have higher expected value than Andy's trip aces. So while this board slightly favors Andy, it's only by a little bit, and the range advantage is somewhat offset by positional advantage. With his King Jack of Hearts, he is supposed to be betting most of the time the small sizing. Checking is also fine. He does put in the small size, and right off the bat, things get off the rails with Garrett calling with his King 10 of clubs, which should be a pure fold, and loses $130 on average to make the call, assuming that Andy plays well at later streets. So this was really a statement by Garrett that he thinks he can outplay Andy later, which, you know, he does. And if in theory, if Garrett wanted to get a little feisty, the pocket pairs make more sense to continue with because they still can turn a full house, which would be a very sneaky, strong hand. You know, pocket fives can work its way in there. That 5 rolls off. You have that full house, you beat all those trip aces, versus this King 10 of clubs, pretty much drawing dead to trip aces. Even, you know, the running 2 pairs, no good, it's already counterfeited. You know, the backdoor straight is effectively nothing because it's hard to hit, and even when you do, it's not even good to a full house or a flush most of the time. So there's really nothing going on for King 10 of clubs. The pocket pairs make much more sense to continue with. So Andy should take note that Garrett is just calling way too loose in these spots, and, you know, maybe should be hero calling Garrett more if Garrett's range is so wide. Now we see the King of Diamonds roll off on his turn, which does give Andy this showdown value with a pair of kings. So he understandably wants to check it because he's probably thinking all the better hands are going to call a bet. Most of the worst hands are going to fold. He doesn't really need much protection. And he wants to see a river because he still has a flush draw, which might be good. So it's very understandably he checks. But he does also bet sometimes with his hand, and his range in general wants to do some betting here because that ace-king does now have the nuts. And it wants to build a pot because they're still very deep. They started this hand with over 1,000 big blinds. So with those hands like those ace-king and even the ace-queen, you want to bet and start building the pot. But you'll notice that even despite that, ace-king isn't pure betting. And it's precisely because we have these pairs of kings and maybe some pocket queens and pocket jacks that really want to check. And you want to make sure that checking range is protected. And that's really going to be the crux of this hand, whether Andy is checking enough ace-king on this turn to protect these other one-pair hands checking. Because if he doesn't check enough, then he's not going to have enough protection for Garrett to easily bluff him on river, which is exactly what happened. Now we see the 10 of hearts on the river, which gives Andy a flush. He makes a big overbet, probably trying to target Garrett's trip aces. In theory, he's supposed to be betting smaller, checking a lot here. His value hands, such as pocket aces or ace-king, block a lot of those trip aces Garrett could have from even calling. And he still does have a lot of middle strength hands like the pocket queens that want to be doing checking. So while Andy's specific hand, it made sense to make that big bet, his range really doesn't want to be big betting here too much, which may have been a small piece of information that Garrett used to figure out what Andy had. However, if I node lock Andy to make a big bet here, he doesn't lose much EV, so I don't think this was really much of a mistake, other than it might have given Garrett some hints as to what Andy had. So this hand got pretty far off of an equilibrium strategy, but we can do some node locking to tell the solver, hey, just call with that king of clubs, 10 of clubs on the flop, in Garrett's shoes, and in Andy's shoes, make some of these big bets on the river with the flushes. And once that happens, we can see what Garrett's position looks like. And with his king of clubs, 10 of clubs, we do see some small raising, mostly folding, but doing a little bit of raising. However, it is the small size. And what you're going to find is that Garrett made a massive raise. It was almost 2x pot on top of what was already an overbet. So once we're talking about these deep stacks, massive bets, we really want combos that block the nuts. And ace of spades with his ace 3 suited and ace 2 suited serve it better. You might think they have more showdown value being trip aces, but after Andy overbets river, he's really repping at least a strong pair of trip aces, if not stronger, like a flush he has or a full house. But really, once we put in another 300 big blinds with still some money behind, a lot of money left behind, we really want to block the nuts. And you might think that ace of spades, king of clubs, both block ace king, but actually the ace of spades blocks twice as many combos, because once we go back to the flop and we look at ace king, we'll notice that if you look at that top row, there's 3 combos with the ace of spades, but only a single combo of offsuit with the king clubs. For the suited combos, it's 1 each, but for the offsuit combos, it's 3-1. So overall, 4 combos the ace of spades blocks, 2 the king of clubs blocks. And that's because there's already 2 aces on the flop, so the aces are a little more short supply. And when the ace of hearts falls on that flop, then the ace of hearts king of clubs combo is already blocked, but there's no ace of spades combos blocked. So not all blockers are created equal. From a theoretical standpoint, the ace of spades is a better card to have in your hand when you're making these massive raises. So now let's look back at Andy's response facing this massive bet, and we'll see with this king jack of hearts, he doesn't have it very often, but he is just folding it 88% of the time. Same thing with his king of hearts, queen of hearts flush. He's calling that 20% of the time, but mostly folding it. And that surprised me a bit when I looked at this hand, because when I first watched it, it does seem a bit like Garrett is bullying Andy, and Andy needs to take a stand and start calling G-Man's bluffs in some of these spots. However, Andy made a massive overbet, and then Garrett made another massive over raise on top of that, like a 1.7x pot raise, which has to work a majority of the time for it to be profitable. And Andy actually doesn't need to be hero calling with flushes that often to disincentivize Garrett for making these bluffs. What's much more important is that he gets ace king into these lines. So if he's checking turn and overbetting river with some flushes, then he needs to be doing the exact same line with ace king, because if he does that even some of the time with ace king, then Garrett is just going to run into it too often and lose money with this raise. And the fact that Garrett's making this raise anyway does indicate that perhaps he either has a live read on Andy, or he just thinks Andy is very unbalanced with this line, that he would be betting ace king on the turn, or when he did check it, maybe he'd check again for a big check raise. But Garrett may just think that this check turn overbet river line does not have as much ace king in it as it should, so he can get away with a very, very risky and not really theoretically approved bluff. So in conclusion, the commentary made it seem like Garrett was making this very theoretically approved blocker bluff. However, his king of clubs blocks less combos of ace king than the ace of spades would, and a bad ace of spades, like an ace 3 or an ace deuce, would have about as much showdown value as his counterfeited 2 pair. So the suited aces make better theoretical bluffs in this spot. However, Garrett diverged significantly both with his flop call and his river raise from an equilibrium solution, but he also, at the end of the day, won a very big pot and punished a mistake from Andy, betting probably a little too big with his flush. But more than anything, I think the big crux of this hand is range construction, because even though Andy is out of position, he is still in good shape as long as he works ace-king into his various lines. Because he does have that nuts advantage, Garrett really can't put as much pressure on Andy's range as he otherwise would in position, unless Andy does a line that he doesn't do enough with the ace-king, and in which case his range becomes very capped, and a great player like Garrett is going to attack a capped range no matter what he has. So he did have a little bit of board interaction, and that was enough for Garrett. So even though Garrett diverged significantly from an equilibrium solution in this hand, I would rather learn from Garrett than the equilibrium solution, in the sense that I think he picked up on a capped range from Andy, and he made a great read, and he went after it. And the lesson for Andy, more than anything, is make sure you work the nuts into all your lines. Thank you for watching Live Poker Theory Episode 2, and I will keep on trying to improve the editing and audio and video quality over time. But thank you for watching these early efforts.